Hutchins. He serves on the Seattle Planning Commission, on the Seattle chapter of the American Institute of Architects Board of Directors, and is co-chair of the Public Policy Board. He's co-chair of the AIA Seattle's Housing Task Force, organized many public programs on urban design, housing, and accessory dwelling units. He was named the AIA Seattle's Volunteer of the Year in 2020. He's a former Design Review Board member and Groundswell Northwest treasurer. In 2017, he co-founded More Options for Accessory Residents, a grassroots organization that helped pass Seattle's landmark ADU reform. Seattle Magazine named Matt one of the 35 most influential people in Seattle in 2019. He's also taught design at the University of Washington, Arizona State University. Most recently, a really cool seminar at the studio at the University of Washington School of Architecture on possible housing typologies that would work in single-family zoning. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Matt.
All right, great. Thanks, Patrick. Welcome everybody. Let's see. There is absolutely just so much happening right now in terms of land use and zoning and housing. So this will be I have a bit of a slide deck, but then it'll be kind of an open-ended, I think, space for questions. I'm just happen to be like sort of plugged into a lot of these conversations that are happening, and so I'd be happy to I think take questions at the end. Is that the sort of the norm?
Yeah, we're gonna let you give your presentation. We'll ask some questions, and then I just put in the chat. Feel free to throw questions in as we go, and we will do our best to get to all of them.
Yeah, cool. Okay. All right, so I wanted to start off with just this thought here that Seattle is evolving as we grow, and that we need just an insane amount of new housing over the next 25 years. Here I have 152,000 new housing units, but that number seems to be a bit of a moving target. Between we have the comp plan alternatives calling for 80,000 new units, 100,000 new units, 120,000 new units. If you include the backlog for affordable housing, it might be another 26,000 units. Anywhere from 80 to 250,000 units you could make a case for. It just means that there are a lot of people that are coming to Seattle. And for us, I think the question is not so much the number, the big number, not the target of the comp plan. It's more about what we do on each individual lot and how do we make room for new housing, but also use that as a conduit to create the kind of city that we want. So let's see. So I'm going to start off with, let's see if this works. Okay. So hopefully everyone, I don't know, has everyone been involved in the comp plan process? I hope so. There was a pretty robust community outreach effort to get people, and I think that this crew is probably quite attuned to what's happening with regards to the comp plan. But in short, the growth strategy, they are currently studying 5 different alternatives. No action, one that just focuses growth in kind of a very, very similar way to what's currently happening, adding density along corridors, expanding urban villages, doing kind of a broad range of, or a broad sort of incremental upzone everywhere. And they've kind of broken that into 5 different alternatives. The 5th alternative, this alternative 5, kind of just mashes all those things together. So here you can see, the dark blue areas, the dots, the urban villages, and then 2 different layers of kind of pink. And so this is maybe what that future land use map might look like. And I think, and there's some pretty significant changes. I think that I personally was a little worried when in the scoping process, like what would happen, how much of the stuff that I personally have been advocating for was going to make it into this final map. And and I'm actually pretty excited about this, and I'll kind of like walk through some of those reasons why. So on the left is, the entire city, and then I enlarged the key, but then on the right is just my neighborhood of West Seattle. And if you don't know West Seattle, it's hard to kind of like, contextualize how this might be different. And so I've just overlaid it against the current land use map. And as you can see, all those areas in yellow are what have been called single family zones now and are neighborhood residential zones. And so these are all everything that's in yellow currently is you can build a house, an accessory dwelling unit, and a detached accessory dwelling unit, or 2 accessory dwelling units. Those areas in orange, in brown, those are higher density places, low rise, mid rise, and the urban villages aren't shown on here. But what you can see, the difference from the existing map to the potential future map is the addition of these neighborhood anchors, which the city is kind of defining as about a 2,000 square foot or 2,000 foot diameter area around kind of nascent commercial areas. And those happen, along Del Ridge, along 35th, down at Alki in my neighborhood. These are places that might have historically had a more diverse mix of housing and jobs, and dry cleaners and a restaurant and all that kind of stuff. And they had been kind of zoned out of existence. And now there's the potential for those are coming back. One of the other alternatives was this corridor scheme. And I think that everyone, whoop, there goes my video. Hang on a second. Let's see if I can get me back here. Oh, there we go. All right. Was the corridor scheme. I think that one of the strongest critiques of our current land use pattern is that if not sequestered in urban villages, we have left all of the density along arterials that are more often than not hazardous to people's health, through traffic, through pollution, noise, dangerous for kids, all that areas. And I think that there was a huge equity concern that anything that developed along corridors was going to end up being dangerous and inequitable. But if you look on the right, that they've actually spread that out to, it's essentially a quarter mile, a 5-minute walk either side of these kind of arterials. It's not ideal, right? However, if we're a quarter mile, from a city, from one of these major arterials, you can see that if we look at the whole of the map, there is a lot of territory that is going to have a significant capacity for new housing and new sort of mixed use. The other thing you can see from this map is just the expansion of all of the urban villages. So not only I think that they're potentially going up, but they're also forming a much more natural walkshed. You can see specifically, like, Greenwood is such a gerrymandered urban village that it looks essentially like a cross, and they're kind of undoing some of these historical sort of unnatural boundaries that have been drawn in this plan. Let's see. So let's go forward. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is then you look at the most common housing types that are going to be in these various new kind of new spaces, these new urban places. One, they're talking about everywhere that was yellow on that first map, all the single family areas. Those are now looking to be, look, you can have a detached house there, those stay. Duplex, triplex, those things are possible. But fourplexes, townhouses, row houses, those are not typically allowed. And then sixplexes and 3-story flats. there's actually the potential for quite a bit of new sort of housing types in even in every neighborhood. And if you go back to the map, that's the rest of the territory. So you look at, if we go back, we end up with about 50% of the land that's zoned residential ends up being either in this kind of a neighborhood anchor, a corridor, or urban center, urban village. And the other 50% also gets some sort of an incremental upzone. So it's really broad, which I think is very powerful. So I just wanted to sort of highlight, and that yeah, if you look, if you do kind of a crosswalk across all those different zones, you end up with a lot of territory that could have, really, 4 to 5, 6 to 7 story buildings. And most neighborhoods, if this holds true, the potential to have, sixplexes, which is, 2x what is allowed today. So I think that this is actually, there's a lot of promise here. One thing that I think I'm always like, I'm always both optimistic and also really, I don't know, pessimistic about how much the input that we might have to the process, how much effect it might have. And I think that, between in the original scoping report, more than 2/3 of the comments, this is based on a study done by Affordability and Share the Cities, that they went through all the comments, email, and also from the engagement hub. And 2/3 of them were for either alternative 5 or something bolder. And so that really did move the needle, move the window into something that look, there's definitely an appetite for a more transformative increment, something much more powerful than just a fourplex, which is good because fourplexes probably aren't going to pencil. Okay, so I wanted to just come back to this idea of why having a broad area that can handle up to sixplexes is so important. Oftentimes we hear about what the zoning capacity is of a. Right now, most of Seattle is at its capacity. It's all neighborhood residential, and it's can be 1, 2, or 3 houses. There's not much extra capacity there, and we've put 80% of our most recent construction in the last 20 years in the urban villages, and so they are tending to be also built out. And so by just adding more zoning capacity to the urban villages that are already built out, it's not going to add a lot of new units. And so you really have to spread it out and create more opportunities everywhere in order to give so that there are more chances for these projects to happen. And so like in this little diagram, I just have drawn, these aren't stories, these are just, individual units. On single family, you've got on one side, and then we have kind of our split with the kind of multi-story urban form. All these people up here at the top, whoops, these are all new households, and they're looking to live somewhere. And so some of them are going to live in ADUs, some of them are going to be able to, find housing or buy a house. Some are going to move into the urban villages, they're going to rent apartments. But what we see from every projection is that there is going to be a shortfall. There are going to be people who are not going to fit into the existing housing stock that we have. And so it's really important to provide some sort of buffer where those people can eventually fit in. So as I said, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just dump, sort of intangible zoning capacity on top of buildings that have just been built, urban villages that have been the nexus of all of our development the last 20 years. We really need to think about a broad change in all the low-rise areas and all the neighborhood residential areas. And if you have lots of individual opportunities, there's a high probability that you're going to be able to find a situation that's right for you, whether it be in a new development, in an existing development, and as long as we provide lots of different opportunities for that, stacked flats, fourplexes, duplexes, triplexes, all those things that we were looking at earlier in that diagram of all the different housing types, as long as we allow that across a broad area, one, there's more opportunity, but two, there's less speculation because there are fewer. If you don't have this kind of like broad ability to undertake a project, then you're really focusing all the sort of development pressure on individual parcels, and right now that it's all been focused primarily on areas that we upzoned that were primarily BIPOC. Those communities have been the most vulnerable to development pressure and economic displacement because we've zoned it that way. This map, I think, because it is so broad, is a significant change, and we can talk later about how to bake in anti-displacement measures into this map so that we don't just continue to see more broadly the same sort of pressures that have led to the both concentration of poverty and also the displacement of BIPOC communities down to the south. All right, so what do those buildings inside that buffer look like in our kind of like low rise, in our neighborhood residential? Currently, like the next increment, the sort of most fruitful sort of development pattern has been townhouses. And so on the left, you can see I've got basically just a standard block. What does it look like under current sort of townhouse construction types? What you end up with, Seattle's long, skinny lots are multiple townhouses that are arrayed and they face the side. And you end up with really kind of two kinds of modes. Either you're building in the backyard and kind of overwhelming the original house, or you're building something that's long and skinny, not much open space, not great quality open space, and very little eyes on the street. And that is, so you end up with either the multiplex, which is like a multiplex, except it's kind of like short in front, tall in the back. We are seeing a lot of this in residential small lot now. Is this kind of like a necessary evil? I don't know. It's where the only opportunity is for development right now, just because housing prices are so expensive that even if it's not in great condition, is still worth enough for the most part to keep on, to hold on to. You can see like just sort of the unfortunate quality of some of the, once we start thinking about the city as being just all townhouses, like what do we do with these side yards? They're not, there's no place to play. There's no place to gather. They're essentially just kind of narrow sections that can't be functionally used. So I started thinking about like, well, how would we, if we really wanted to think proactively about the city that we want to live in, we have all this housing demand. What would be kind of the highest and best use, the kind of like, how do we get that sort of urban design, urban quality, and tackle some of these other goals, high quality construction, sustainable design, the density that's going to allow for us to maintain housing affordability. And so I have kind of this alternative, which is sixplex. This is not like groundbreaking in any sense of the, because you see these everywhere, that they have not been kind of zoned out of existence. So in a sense, this is a bit of a throwback, but it makes a ton of sense. So you see kind of our typical lot, our typical building envelope, something that, ends up being 40 by 65 on a typical 5,000 square foot lot. And it tends to then dictate that you end up with these kind of long, skinny structures. But because of side yard setbacks, because of the long depth, because of the height limit that really means that we don't get a lot of apartments, you end up with these kind of skinny, long townhouses. Now, if you rotate the building footprint, and go setback to or property line to property line. Push the building towards the front, and that maintains all that space in the backyard. That's where almost all of our mature trees are. That allows space for more street trees. It's actually a little bit less lot coverage, so more landscape area, and it's usable landscape area. You can see if this is a sixplex, it's higher density, and because of the form factor is much more compact, we have less stairs, we have a better shot at achieving something like passive house or other sort of green building types. And I've just kind of laid out some of the plans, what you can do on a 40-foot lot. You could easily have 3 2-bedrooms and 3 1-bedrooms. You could have an accessory like commercial space down below. You could have a guest suite down below, for use for the other 5 units. You could have, it's a really excellent sort of, footprint for lots of different uses. And again, we could zone for big balconies, front and back, and that protects all that sort of rear yard. And then just in terms of sketches, like it's just a simple building. This is why they're so prevalent. And we can, use the roof for, stormwater mitigation, solar, recreation, and it kind of lends itself more towards either, passive house or cross-laminated timber, dowel laminated timber. It's just a much more efficient shape. And as we push it out towards the street, and we have all this kind of we have this kind of balcony zone, you end up with a really, really friendly streetscape. Over time, as these kind of would happen in the neighborhood, they would not necessarily, since they're the same height as what you can build within a current McMansion, at the same height, it would be sort of like, filling in over time. They would fill in more. Maybe you allow for additional opportunities at corners, but eventually you end up with kind of a perimeter block. And this is over a generation, over 100 years, really is not going to happen in, in even in the 20 years that this would, this cycle, this, sort of comp plan cycle is going to happen. And so, so I think I wanted to, sort of tie this together that I think that one, we've made a lot of progress in terms of shaping the plan to be something that I feel I still have hopes for, especially, but the devil is in the details, and getting into how it works on each individual lot is going to be the difference between this working or not working. And between our city being filled with these sort of multiplexes or having a real streetscape. And so going back to that original number, 152,000, housing units, to me, that's not the number that is important. The number is 3 units per parcel, 4 units per parcel, 6 units per parcel, and then just repeated 100,000 times over time. So, so this is kind of a hope for that people will take what's happening with the comp plan, continue to be engaged, and continue to sort of voice a preference for an urban design that makes sense, and go out there and support it. There's a whole series of open houses that are happening now, including one tonight that we are not necessarily preempting. They're probably preempting us. And so I encourage everyone to go out there and talk to their talk at the testify essentially at these big meetings. As I said, 65 to 70% of the comments were really in favor of being bold with regards to land use, and we have to keep that up and make sure that what people hear in those rooms basically jives with what we saw online. I wanted to do 2 other things. I don't know, I probably have, I'm talking a little long. I want to do 2 things. One is design review is happening. Design review reform is happening right now, but that's a whole nother topic and we can talk about it, but they are looking for people to volunteer their time for design review boards. I think there's 21 positions that are going to be available. And so you should all, if you're really interested in abundant housing, if you're interested in affordable housing, that is a great venue. And I feel like the composition of the boards is going to shift and it's going to be a much more valuable experience. The last thing I wanted to do is just highlight what the Planning Commission is doing. We have recently, over this year, put out 4 issue papers, one on the growth strategy, one on repurposing the right-of-way, one on anti-displacement, and one that's going to come out next week on addressing affordable housing and kind of making up for that gap. All these papers are excellent resources if you are interested in augmenting, what you're, like if you're talking to someone and you need facts, those are great places to get it. I think that I've gone way over, so I'm just gonna shut up now and take questions. Let's see, should I quit screen sharing or should I leave that up?
How about you quit screen sharing so
Okay.
you can see more Matt and less.
Okay, I
Yes,
don't
we can
know
go
if
back
that's
to
a
those
great thing. Okay.
um, I know we probably have a variety of people with different knowledge levels about
Sure.
the process. Could you just do a quick summary of the timeline? Because right now the city's released its scoping document for the environmental impact statement and is taking
Yeah.
comments which will shape the options. And then where does it go from there? Because this is one opportunity for people to chime in. And then where's our next opportunity for people to shape this process?
Well, at these open houses, but what's happening now? They did a kind of a preliminary report. Like these are what we think we're going to study. More than 1,000 people commented, and a bunch of organizations commented on what they should actually study. Now they've created this report, and that's where those diagrams that I pulled are from. At this point, they are going to now study them. They're going to look at traffic impacts. They're going to look at climate impacts. They're going to look at housing affordability. They're going to look at how do each one of these alternatives, how do they perform for housing affordability? Do they create affordable housing? All these questions are going to come out, and then they're going to have a draft environmental impact statement. That thing is probably going to be, I don't know, 1,200 pages of just pure fun. And then after that, there'll be another comment period, and then they'll modify that into a final environmental impact statement. That environmental impact statement will become the foundation for legislation that will change that map. So if you're worried about like what's going to happen to my particular parcel, we don't know yet, because there are a lot of decisions between now and then. Part of why you should stay kind of engaged as much as possible. But the total process for this, the comp plan is supposed to kind of go into effect in 2024, and then we'll do it all over again in 8 years. So it's really like study for 3 years. It stays in force for 8. Start it all over again. So, okay.
And then part of this is a political process too, right? So the mayor and council will have their say as well. So it's really, sorry, go on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's not just planners that are kind of like, in their, sort of ivory tower trying to, suss this out. There is definitely opportunity to engage with political leaders, the mayor, city council, because even if they have the ability to kind of modify these things, I know for a fact that all of the comments that came in on alternative 5 and alternative 6 made the sort of basis for the alternative 5 much stronger. They couldn't like, just jump to alternative 2 that was kind of the sort of least transformative, when 60 to 70% of the people were saying, go bolder. These are serious issues. We want you to engage with them.
Great. There was a question about the comp plan process in the sense of why are we just picking little areas to upzone at different levels? Why don't we just upzone the whole city at once? Is this planning or is this politics?
Let's see. Like, I would say that, yeah, it's I don't know if there's exactly a difference, right? Planning is kind of like politics, just in extremely slow motion. But in this case, I think that like the urban growth strategy that we've had really did create two cities. There was one that was subject to nearly all the growth, one that was sheltered. The fact that there are on that map, every parcel in Seattle is somehow affected is a win. It probably doesn't make sense to say that we should have high rises in Magnolia, compared to a high rise in Ballard. And so kind of realizing that I think that as long as everyone's participating, they're not all good. Not every neighborhood and every site is going to make sense. They'd all have different amenities. They have different access to, their, job centers, transit, et cetera. It still makes sense to concentrate some of those resources around hubs. And that's, cities don't necessarily evolve as sort of a uniform fabric. And so, I think that, like, yeah, this is still going to be uneven. It's not going to be as uneven in the past. And actually, I think that there are places where we want it to be uneven. Part of the sort of anti-displacement sort of strategy is to actually protect neighborhoods that were really vulnerable, that were maybe subject to development pressure in the past, to protect community resources or community, like businesses that are community anchors. We want to, like, reduce the pressure there, and so that's also going to create a weighted sort of equation, and hopefully it's weighted in a different way, so that opportunity actually is spread around a little bit better.
So, but building on that, how do we accept and accommodate so much more growth while avoiding displacement and addressing equity concerns, as you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I was just talking about, like, having I think what's going to happen is the access to opportunity map and the displacement risk map are going to come into play when you look at all those zones had, like, sort of like different potential housing types that might go in those places. And I think that you're going to see the housing types are going to be inflected by the anti-displace, or this displacement risk map. And so I think that you're going to see less sort of upzones in places that like, in, like, the central district, and more in Wallingford, because of internal equities or inequities, and trying to basically balance that out, build those communities up. That is probably the way that I think we're going to see most of that. The other thing that is coming on as a program, which it's not quite there yet, is we already have this equitable development initiative, but there's going to be also the ability to do equitable zoning. And so it's almost like having an expedited zoning process for community-led organizations that are doing that sort of, anchoring work for communities. So, we're seeing some of those projects that are getting funded through the Equitable Development Initiative. They have to come from somewhere, and oftentimes there's a huge barrier in terms of just not just money, but also knowledge and power, and how to get from A to B. And this equitable zoning initiative hopefully is going to be something that says, all right, this is the pathway, and that will also help to, like, create stronger communities.
Great. You sort of touched on this as well in your last answer, but I know one of the goals of trying to upzone more affluent neighborhoods is to provide access. I shouldn't even say upzone, provide more different housing opportunities, to provide access to what is essentially gated communities, to high quality schools, parks, access to transit and jobs. So if we do open up Wallingford or some of these more affluent neighborhoods, how do we do more housing options? How do we ensure that those are affordable for a broad range of people? Is it just mandatory housing affordability, or are there other mechanisms that can be incorporated in the comp plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they have hinted, the OPCD has hinted that MHA is going to be expanded and kind of modified. So that it does create more affordable housing in general. In our upcoming paper, the Addressing the Affordable Housing Gap, actually the title is TBD. So I don't know. We'll see what the final title is in about a week. But one of the things that we talk about is the fact that affordable housing is not only is it limited in number, but it's also limited by land use and where it can be. And so I think one of the big challenges is to also create a building block of zoning that works for affordable housing as well. And that may very well be that, something like a sixplex is bite-sized enough for a community land trust or for a project for like the social housing initiative. And I think that my hope is that there is this, and it's kind of like a Goldilocks project that we can provide more housing options, we can provide a greener building, a lower carbon lifestyle, and some affordable housing, on each site. And if we could do that once, then we could do it 100 times. And so that's pretty much, that's my hope. That's what I keep sort of, when I see these maps, I see daylight for that sort of project.
Excellent. Another common concern, I think, is trees. The third rail in Seattle.
Yeah.
Should activists start rehearsing their "Hole in the Sky" song and get ready for it, or is there a way to mitigate, to allow development and accommodate trees? And it seemed like part of your sixplex plan was really working towards that.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of one of the foundational thoughts with the sixplex. Our side yards are not the places where our big trees are, but our backyards are. And if we're saying that we want to preserve trees, but the only place we can build new housing is in the backyard where the trees are, that's not going to work. And so I think that development can coexist. But it's going to take, probably a harder conversation about what the urban form is. And once we overcome that, then I think that we have a great chance at increasing our tree canopy and having it not impact the number of housing, places that for people to live that we build. I think also, street trees everywhere, street trees mandated in NR zones, in LR zones, and also like additional work in basically in neighborhoods that have been traditionally underinvested in, like sidewalks and right-of-way improvements and street trees. That's probably one of those things that within the transportation plan and the comp plan should be a focus. Basically backfilling a lot more tree canopy into those neighborhoods and through street trees.
As someone who lives in a neighborhood that is it has blocks and blocks that are missing street trees, I'd love to see more investment in that.
Yeah.
You just mentioned the sixplex concept. My question is always with the stacked flats. You're currently allowed to do it in a lot of the LR zones or some version of it. But I haven't seen any developers do it. So
Yeah.
what is the obstacle? Is it zoning? Is it the condo? And I guess I've even seen in some of the RSL residential small lot projects lately where people are doing 800 square foot houses, they're doing them as condos. So it seems like
Yeah.
they're not fully terrified of condo liability.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that right now it just we've forgotten about it in some ways. And a lot of times, developers and builders are basically optimizing the last success. And this is kind of a wholly different stream. It's Seattle Building Code, not Seattle Residential Code. People have to get over that it's not ground related. But all these old Capitol Hill apartment buildings are popular. They're filled. It's
Mhm.
just that we're not building them. And so since kind of coming out with this, and other people who were talking about these kind of like small, kind of fine-grained apartment buildings, that fit on any sort of Seattle urban lot. I'm definitely getting a lot more calls for like, hey, does this work? Let's work up a performa. So I think that it's coming, but it's just not quite there yet. It's funny. Spokane recently, they had an emergency declaration where they just kind of like called off most of their onerous zoning and said, all right, for a year you can do a fourplex on any parcel. And uh, so I was working with a developer to buy a parcel and build a fourplex because I thought, this is going to work. But
Mhm.
now, unfortunately, we're fighting interest rates and rental rates, and so so my little demonstration project is on hold.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Um, if you want to jump so we make sure we touch on it. Could you talk a little bit more about the design review reform? And it seems like there's a lot of stirring. There was the council mandated the SDCI examine it. There's been a process. Can you just give a quick update on where it's at and if it's going to accomplish anything?
Patrick, we've been kind of like talking about design review as long as I've known you, like what, 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think
So
what
it's
did it say? AI has been working on it for 20 years or something.
yeah. So I'm like, but I do feel like this is like, the stars have somewhat aligned in that council, it's on their radar, it's on the mayor's radar, and so Seattle for Everyone has kind of convened a cohort of it's mostly developers and builders and architects who work on the projects that are most subject to design review, and they have kind of a suite of changes that are primarily about optimization. Taking some of the risk out, taking some of the steps out, so that taking it out of the black box that sometimes these projects will drop into a black box and you just don't know why decisions are made. And so there's kind of there those sorts of reforms. AIA is looking at how to change the sort of process so that it responds to equity a little bit more, or there are equity inputs into the process, and that's probably kind of like how the design outreach, or I should say like the community outreach program that fronts design review hasn't always been that effective. And so I think it's probably, we're talking about it like how to make it a little bit more targeted so that you get something out of it. All things being equal, we're talking about for the last 3 years since COVID, affordable housing projects have been outside of design review. And with these latest changes, they're potentially staking out other areas that are going to not be subject to design review. And to me, what that means is that the design review is the stick, and not being in design review is the carrot to me. And that's not really a program that is effective. If you're saying like, do a great building, or we're going to subject you to design review. That's not a process that is healthy. That doesn't mean that that means that your best outcomes are to avoid design review, and that's going to shape the kinds of projects. We see projects that are smaller than they should be because they want to avoid design review. Lots of sort of shenanigans to avoid design review because it's a pretty onerous process. I think the last count was, for full design review, it might take more than 2.5 years. And so I don't know. My hope is that we take on some of those reductions in process. We limit the guidelines to guidelines that are really actually important, and those are guidelines that the designers choose, not the planners. So that instead of responding to 104 guidelines, we're responding to 5, and they're really, really important, and we can get people around, motivated around those. I don't know. I, again, eternally hopeful that sometime in the next couple years, it will change. I guess the other proof that design review maybe doesn't work so well is right now, SDCI is running the stakeholder process, and it's 6 months behind, and it's not going so well, and it's just kind of maybe proof that maybe SDCI shouldn't be managing design review. But I'm sure they would take offense to that. But it's just kind of like points to how difficult the prospect of codifying what good design is, and somehow sort of legislating that.
Yeah. If you had your, mayor for a day, dictator mayor for a day, what would your preferred outcome be?
What for what?
I'm sorry, for the design review process, would you whisk it away, or would you limit it? Would you?
I would, because I don't think that if we look at the projects that are coming out of design review versus affordable housing projects that are not in design review, I don't see a difference. So what is design review providing? I think that there's got to be a different way for community members to interface with the designers and to talk about what's happening in their neighborhoods, and design review isn't a great venue for any of that.
Excellent. I'm going to jump around a bit with some questions to try to make sure we answer some of the attendee questions. In your opinion, what is the standout worst of the worst of Seattle's land use policies?
God. Let's see. I have to go with building modulation. This sort of, forced articulation of facades doesn't fool anyone. It doesn't lead to good design. So as just like when I go around the city and I wonder why we aren't building as many great buildings as we could, it's so easy to point to this sort of, skin deep fiction, this pastiche that we kind of apply to the outside of the building. Someone said that really we only have like 6 inches to create the architecture, right? Just that skin, and we're so confined to like this I don't know, this sort of Tetris, box upon box facade treatment that I think we'll look back on this period and be like, oh my God, really? I don't think that that's necessarily the worst, because anything that is really leading to projects dying on the vine, I'd say like a lot of the difficulties with getting street improvement permits and city light, those things are having compounding problems that that drive up rents and housing prices for everyone. That's worse, but driving down the street, it's articulation.
We talk about that one in my office all the time. It is Seattle's like signature look these days.
Oh,
it's like our brownstone.
Yeah, horrible
not,
legacy.
not great, not great. So jumping sort of back to the some of the comp plan sort of things. I think Laura Lowe coined the 4 floors in a corner store. And a lot of the discussion or planning lately has been around 15-minute cities. And
Yeah.
we really want to address climate. How do we make it so people can walk or easily transit or bike or roll or skate or whatever to get some of their basic needs met? Where does the corner store fit in?
Hopefully everywhere. So I think that, like, like in that sixplex, kind of module, I left, a space for a commercial suite in the ground floor. That's like right now we don't allow mixed use accessory commercial suites in most, in most areas, and they just really need to be allowed to exist organically. We need to support, sort of that entrepreneurial spirit where, like, your little neighborhood cidery, gets a footprint, makes a little bar, and, and takes off like yonder cider. I think that's who it is. So, but we need to have a neighborhood structure that allows for that. And so, yeah, so I think, the corner store doesn't have to be on the corner. Certainly, I think that we just need to have a zoning that allows for mixed use. I mean, I think personally, having just kind of exited my small kid period as a father, my kid is now 10. She doesn't need daycare, but that is a huge need. And it's so restricted and difficult to build a daycare or to even have a sort of residential daycare. And so I think that there's lots of uses that I would love to bring back into our neighborhood so that they're not the monoculture of of just for the most part detached houses. And so that's how we do it, because once you can live near where you're dropping your kids off to play, where you can go to the dentist, where you can go, go to your own home office and do all that stuff without having to get into a car, then we're starting to really tackle those issues about climate change, about human health, about livability.
Well, that the Planning Commission recently just came out with their a policy paper on examining city right of way and how to repurpose that and how to use that. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that fits into this?
Yeah. Let's see. So the war on cars. No, it's let's see. So I think the reality is that we just don't have space to provide parking, space for the automobile for everyone in the same way that we have in the past. There's just not enough, geometrically, there's just not enough space for it. And it's such a hazard, and it dominates whatever public space we have. And so we're talking about how we basically transition from an urban realm where 25% of private automobiles to where rights of way can actually be the sort of social and cultural spaces that they often are, that we saw sort of spring up in the age of COVID, where no one was driving to work and they suddenly discovered streeteries. And so that sort of swap over time of the priority of the right of way from cars to everything else. That's not going to be an easy transition. That is a difficult prospect. It happens with, I mean, right now concurrently there's the Seattle Transportation Plan, which isn't affiliated with the Seattle Comprehensive Plan. They are happening kind of sequential or simultaneously, but their feedback or their sort of inputs aren't quite the same. But having those things align would be huge, and starting to make those kind of investments in all the other forms of mobility, and investments in sidewalks and investments in street trees, all those sorts of things that are going to deprioritize the private automobile are the things that we need to go into. And so that's what that paper is. I'm really proud of that. It's excellent work by the Planning Commission.
Excellent. I think we just have 3 minutes left. So is there anything else that you would love to share, or like something you wanted to touch on that you couldn't?
I don't know. I think I covered a lot of territory, but
You did.
I'd say like yeah, check out Design Review. See if you want to volunteer. I did it for 3 years and learned a bunch, met a bunch of people. That was good. And hopefully these dialogues are going to be much better with maybe fewer guidelines. And then staying engaged with the comp plan process. It definitely feels like it is, what's happening. It's like, 20 years out. How am I having any sort of impact? And the reality is, over the last, I think from where I thought the design, where the comp plan alternatives would be and where they are, is miles better. I really thought this was going to be a pretty tough slog. It still will be, but what I see is the impact of people telling their stories about how this is important to them, having seen that kind of move the goals towards something that is a much more livable, low carbon city that I think is going to be more affordable, equitable. So so I think it's a marathon, and you just got to keep chugging along.
You half answered my very last question, which is if people tonight like what they heard, we're like, God, I want to read that 1,200 page EIS when it comes out, and I wanna become a housing activist and try to make, or advocate, and try to build the city that we want, that's low carbon, that has a bountiful tree canopy, where it's safe to walk and bike, and where people can live in a variety of different types of housing in all neighborhoods. What would you tell them? What's the best way to plug in? Who should they call besides the Urbanist?
I was gonna say
Doug.
You should donate to the Urbanist and follow along with the Urbanist. Yeah, no, I think yeah, who knows what's going to happen on Twitter, but I think there are a lot of resources in the public discourse. I think you just have to get beyond the sort of the news story and read some of the source documents to get to Planning Commission. OPCD has an engagement hub where they're constantly sort of soliciting information and surveys, and yeah, and I guess I wish there was like a single place besides the Urbanist, but I would say like yeah, probably listening to nerds like me, I think is a good resource too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining tonight, and thank you everyone for taking part of your Monday. What day is it? Monday. Monday.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
To learn about the comp plan and housing policy and advocacy.
Thank you.
Thanks.